With the many and lengthy betas that have taken place since November of last year for Overwatch, if you're coming into the game with no experience, chances are you're going to be playing against many people who have hours upon hours of experience on you. And that kinda sucks, doesn't it? Well, there's no substitute for experience, but you'll have a much better time going into Overwatch if you know what you're doing from the outset. Hi everyone, Spidey here, and these are 10 things you need to know before you start Overwatch. Number 10, this is obvious, but so many players don't seem to understand it, but this is a team game. Too often I see people playing Overwatch like it's a single player game. They treat their teammates like they're NPC partners in Gears of War or something. You're not the main character of the story. It's a 6-on-6 objective-based multiplayer game where every player has a vital role to the success of the team. If you're playing as Reinhardt, don't just blindly rush in with your charge while your team's back at the entryway. Use your shield to protect your damage dealers and push your way past their defenses. Likewise, if you're an offensive character, look for opportunities to rely on your teammates. Stick with the supports, get behind Reinhardt's shield, push with your team rather than going off alone unless there's a specific reason to go off alone, like flanking a Bastion with a Genji or Tracer. Bottom line, everyone involved in the game will have a better time if your team works together. So be a team player. Number 9, remember how I mentioned Bastion in the last point? Well, let's give a crash course on this guy because if you're just coming into Overwatch, I can almost guarantee you that this guy will make you hate life. Bastion is a robot that can transform into a stationary turret that has by far the highest DPS rate of any character in Overwatch. He shreds shields, he can repair damage to himself, he now has a 360-degree range, and his ultimate lets him transform into a tank that deals ridiculous splash damage, and ultimately, if you're inexperienced with dealing with him, it can just seem like everything about him screams OP. The thing about Bastion though is that probably more so than any other character in the game, there are a ton of counters against him, and if you know them, you can effectively shut him down. First off, the most obvious counter is Genji, who can simply drop down in front of Bastion, turn on Reflect, and turn all that damage towards Bastion himself. But even beyond that, Reaper can teleport behind a Bastion from long distance, Hanzo and Widowmaker can outrange and snipe a stationary Bastion, Mei can set up walls to reduce a Bastion's effectiveness and allow other players to get out of his range, Tracer, Junkrat, and Hanzo all have ultimates that can easily take care of a Bastion, and just overall there are a ton of options available. You just have to be open to the idea of switching characters as needed to deal with the Bastion. Which leads into our next point. Number 8, don't just learn one character. With MOBAs and fighting games, there's this instinct to have a main. Your go-to, the character that gives you the best chance of winning. And that makes sense for those kinds of games where each individual character is very complex, and you can't switch them out mid-game in order to match the other player's character. But in Overwatch, you can do that. And in fact, it's one of the core aspects of the game. Each character is strong against certain characters and weak against others. And if you stubbornly stick to a character that is disadvantaged against the enemy team's makeup, you're gonna have a bad time. So experiment with each of the characters. The good news is that one of the great things about Overwatch is every character is almost immediately intuitive. You can pick up a character, spend a bit of time with them, and quickly understand what their role is on the team. Of course, you can still have a main, it's just that the point is you don't want to be so married to the idea of just using one character that you never switch to another character when your main is disadvantaged. How do you know when your character is disadvantaged? Well, let's move on to Number 7, know what counters what. We've already went over the characters that are good against Bastion, but he's not the only threat that you'll have to deal with. There are 21 characters currently in Overwatch, and while I'm not going to go over every single soft and hard counter for every single character, I do think it's helpful to highlight a few of the ones that you'll see most often. First off, if you're dealing with a Reinhardt that is shielding his entire team, there are a few options that you can explore. Pharah can shoot from above, forcing the shield up to block the rockets. Tracer causes all sorts of headaches for Reinhardt as her mobility makes her easily able to get around the shield, and her range and speed allow her to avoid Reinhardt's hammer. As we said before, Bastion can shred his shields, and of course, Reaper excels at bringing down big enemies with his shotgun. If you're dealing with a really good Tracer on the other team, consider switching to McCree. McCree's flash grenade will stop a Tracer dead in her tracks, and from there, all it takes is one fan the hammer to wipe her out. Mei and Winston also deal with Tracers pretty well, with Mei's ice gun slowing Tracer down and Winston's shield being able to be used as a constant source of protection while the Tracer gets fried by the electricity gun. Good Widowmakers can be hard to deal with, but swapping over to Winston and being able to close the distance with his jump will make that Widowmaker's life much harder. Alternately, you can engage in a sniper battle by matching Widowmaker for Widowmaker, or hunt her down with a D.Va and her bullet shield. And finally, if you've got to deal with a Torbjorn, you should know that you can generally outrange his turrets fairly easily with characters like Widowmaker, Hanzo, and Pharah. That's just a few, but they're a few of the most important counters to know. Experience will be the best teacher for the rest. And number 6, this should really go without saying, but you'd be surprised. People, play the damn objective. Look, I get that there's no team deathmatch mode in Overwatch, and that may be really weird to you when you just want to kill things, but this is a game where you need to do things that don't involve fragging enemies in order to actually win. Now, don't get me wrong, killing enemies is great. It's a necessary thing to do in order to win. But if you're running off chasing kills as opposed to moving the payload or defending the point or capturing the point, you're probably not being an asset to your team. There's exceptions to every rule, sure, and if you're playing as a Tracer or a Genji and you're harassing the enemy team and preventing them from playing the objective, then sure, okay, that's fine. But everyone else, play the objective! Number 5, strive for a well-balanced team. Again, this is kind of obvious, but it's surprising how many people get caught up in the idea of having a main that they refuse to switch to another character that would balance the team out better. Ideally, you want to have 2 supports and 2 tanks on every team, and then fill out the remaining 2 slots with a combination of offensive or defensive characters, depending on what you're actually playing. Realistically, in a public game, that's probably not going to happen, so at the very least, if your team doesn't have a healer, bite the bullet and pick a healer. I promise you, your chances of winning will go up at least 60%. If your team doesn't have a tank, pick a tank. Otherwise, you're going to have a hell of a hard time pushing through to an objective. Perhaps most importantly though, if your team already has a Widowmaker or a Hanzo, please don't pick another Widowmaker or Hanzo, unless there's an extremely unique situation that calls for it, like multiple Bastions or something. Also, be sure to note when your teammates change characters as well. Whenever a role is gained, another is lost. It's not always possible, but again, always strive for a well-balanced team and your chances of winning will improve dramatically. Number 4, don't waste your ultimates. Now this is a delicate balance because on the one hand, you don't want to just hold on to your ultimates all game, as not using an ultimate is the same as wasting an ultimate, if not worse. At the same time though, you want to keep in mind that your ultimate is a potentially game-changing move that can help your team break through a stalemate. So when I say don't waste your ultimate, what I really mean is look for opportunities where you can coordinate your ultimate to make it the most beneficial to the team. If you're playing as a Zarya, it's probably not the best use of your ult to use it when you're the only person on your team around. Whereas it can basically lead to a free capture if you use it when you have a Pharah or a Junkrat or someone else with good AoE damage around you. Number 3, learn the maps. So this is something that you'll gain with experience, but you'll gain it faster if you actually think about it. Learn what advantages certain characters have on certain maps. Characters that have the ability to push enemies away do great in control point maps like Nepal, Ilios, and Lijiang Tower. Also learn the routes less traveled to find ways to attack from places the opposing team isn't expecting. Remember that characters such as Reaper, Genji, and Tracer excel at being able to get around entrenched enemy defenses and reach the backline. And finally, perhaps most importantly, learn the spawn locations of health pickups. If you're in a fight with someone and you're able to recognize that you're near a health pack, you can gain the advantage by being the first one to pick it up. The bottom line is that all characters are fine to play on every map, but certain characters have distinct advantages depending on the map being played. So be mindful of that and take every advantage that you can get. Number 2, communicate. I know that voice chat opens you up to all kinds of assholes on the internet, and hell, I generally try to avoid it myself for that reason. But the fact is that even the bare minimum amount of communication will help your team dramatically. If your team is lacking a vital role and you don't want to switch yourself for whatever reason, talk with your team. At the very least, you can utilize Overwatch's in-game communication wheel to let your team know how close you are to getting your ultimate, or to attempt to get everyone to group up and manage a team push rather than just have every character individually marching to their death. And number 1, because there are so many more tips to give in Overwatch, I'm just gonna go and list off a number of quick tips rapid fire style. Ready? Zarya's shields actually increase her own damage the more damage they take, as indicated by this number next to her crosshair. So always use those shields. Winston's bubble can be placed on top of a moving payload, granting great moving protection for everyone inside. Likewise, Bastion can transform on the payload and Torbjorn can place turrets on it. Combine Winston and Bastion or Torbjorn on a payload and you can have a mobile fortress that can be really hard to deal with. McCree reloads instantly when he uses his roll, so his big combo is flashbang, fan the hammer, roll, fan the hammer. This can basically take down a tank with one go if you land the combo perfectly. If you're Reinhardt and another Reinhardt is charging at you, use your own charge to cancel it out. You'll both hit each other and be briefly stunned, but it's better than being pinned against a wall. Mercy can use her flight ability and slow descent to follow a Pharah in the air constantly and basically be a guardian angel for her. When playing as Mercy, prioritize tanks as they typically take the most damage and therefore will get you to charge your ultimate faster. Genji can reflect just about anything that's a projectile, including a Widowmaker sniper bullet, Pharah's rocket barrage, and even Hanzo's ultimate. And finally, just remember to keep your priorities in check when you jump into battle. In most scenarios, aim to take down the supports first when you can, especially if you're playing a character like Winston who relies on slow but steady damage over time, which is all but mitigated if the opponent is being healed. With 21 characters, each with their own nuances, there's so much more to learn, but like I said before, experience is often the best teacher. Hopefully though, these tips will be a good starting point and help you get on more equal footing against those who have had the head start of playing on and off since November. Thanks so much for watching this video, you guys, and if you found it to be helpful in any way, hit that like button, and if you're feeling particularly generous, why not click that subscribe button as well so we can see you back here next time. We put up awesome videos like this every single day, 7 days a week, and the best way to be part of that is to subscribe. I've been your friendly neighborhood Spidey. You can find me at Jurassic Rabbit on Twitter, and I'll see you next time.